Welcome to another episode of Unconditioned Mind. Unconditioned Mind is a project of Awakened Global, which is a movement that seeks to contribute towards gender and racial inequality. In this season, we're dealing with entrepreneurship and personal development, which is a very important topic. People have been asking me for it, and here we go. And I have an exciting guest for you today. Wow, wow, wow. A powerhouse of a woman, Celiwe Ross. Maybe, Celiwe, you can just start by just telling us who you are and where you are now. Don't forget your educational qualifications because people want to know those things. And
Sure.
then we'll delve into your career. Over to you.
Thanks, Mamnumku. Thank you so much for having me. So maybe just a little bit about Celiwe. I think, firstly, a wife and mum. I'm married to Andre, and we have three wonderful children. I have an identical twin sister, and I'll talk a little bit about that because that's such a big form of or part of my formation into the adult woman that I am today. And very blessed to have come from a very small nuclear family. So mom, dad, and my twin sister and I. So the four of us, and then obviously extended family. Mom was a nurse and dad was an HR practitioner. And it's interesting how that has led also to the daughters that they happened to raise. They didn't have any boys. And very much, I always say my mom used to say to us that as a parent, your responsibility is to give your children roots and wings. My mom was the roots, so she gave the spiritual guidance, the morals, the values, the giving back to society, and those sorts of imperatives. My dad was definitely the wings. Believed that we could be anything and achieve anything that we worked to become, and I think it's the reason why he managed to raise two black girls who were born into the latter part of apartheid, but managed to become engineers at a time when it was very, very uncommon. So both my twin sister and I are qualified engineers. She's a civil engineer. I happen to be a mining engineer. I was the first Black woman to qualify in South Africa, and that also brought its own dynamics and learnings very early on in my career. So engineer by background. I have an MBA as well. So very much more business focused. My twin sister Siposetu is still very much an engineer and loves that. I've moved more into business and into finance. I did start my career in the mines, in the mining industry in South Africa, in a very, very small town that many of your listeners probably haven't heard about called Steelpoort. Steelpoort has become better known now. Maybe a neighboring town called Burgersfort is better known for platinum. I was in the lesser known Steelpoort where chrome occurs. And spent the largest part of my early career there, and then moved to the coal mines in Witbank before I went and did my MBA because I was just like, I can't do this forever. And after
Yes.
it's a very interesting industry and one that has transformed and changed. But I think there's just so much that I recognize now as an adult. It's easier to connect the dots when you look backwards around how formative that experience on the mines was to who I became as a leader. I went and did my MBA in Cape Town, went at UCT, and then went to
Did you go
Cambridge
full time?
full time.
Did you go full time? Oh,
Full time.
wow. Okay.
Stopped working, met my husband in class, which was great. And I went to Cambridge on exchange as an exchange student after my MBA, and then I came back to work. In that time, I was headhunted by Standard Bank to move into investment banking. I feel like my career is characterized by moments like this because even mining engineering is not what I meant to study. I knew I wanted to be an engineer. Both my sister and
Mm-hmm.
I were quite bookish as teenagers or nerdy, very mathematically inclined. Our mother, who was a nurse, said, "No way, you're doing medicine." And we bumped into engineering, and I ended up in mining engineering purely by chance. It's not really what I meant to study, but I loved it. And I actually ended up in investment banking by similar coincidence. Someone heard me
Mm-hmm.
speaking at a women in mining function and came and spoke to me and said, "I think you'd make a really good investment banker." I was like, "What's that?" Um, and they spent
Yes.
actually quite a lot of time educating me in the world of investment banking, and they hosted me at the bank. And I thought, okay, I think I can do this. And at that time, there was a big commodity boom in the world, and banks had put a lot of money into commodities, particularly into mining and energy and infrastructure assets. But they needed people who could translate what they were seeing financially and take it back to the technical components of what actually makes it work. Like, how do you make money from a mine, and what are the technicalities behind it? And how do you model that? I had that knowledge. I didn't have financial knowledge. And after my MBA, I thought it was a good way to bridge the two. I spent almost a decade as an investment banker at Standard Bank. And because of working in mining, I started traveling the continent. And as they say, the Africa bug bit, I completely fell in love with what I found. So as a Sowetan girl, I was born in Soweto, grew up in Soweto. I'd been seeing some of Southern Africa, but that's like Botswana, Swaziland. I'd never been to the Democratic Republic of Congo or to Kenya or to Ghana, which is what started happening as a result of looking at these mining and energy investments for the bank. And in 2011, they actually sent me to West Africa permanently, and I lived there for about 4 years. My first son
Wow,
was about a
wow.
year old.
Sorry, I don't want to miss this moment. Were you married at this time when
Yes,
you
so
when you moved?
interestingly, yes, interestingly, so I'm divorced and now remarried. And when I speak of my husband, who I met in business school, this is my second husband. I married quite young out of university. And it was an interesting, it has been an interesting journey. There's nothing that will teach you lessons, I think, as a woman, possibly even as a man, but I can only speak from my perspective around the decisions you make in your own life partner. And I think it certainly has made me make very different choices second time around. And needless to say, we're almost 10 years married now, so I think we've made it work.
Oh, yes.
So very
Oh,
happy
yes.
second
We'll talk more
time around.
about that. But I just wanted to find out. So when you moved, you were divorced at that time, so you were single, so you had no issues of, a husband. What happens to the husband? Okay, I
It
just wanted to
actually
clarify that.
accelerated the divorce, to be honest. It actually accelerated the separation of the marriage for a number of reasons. But
Okay.
suffice it to say that as a result, I was on my own with my son. And we Ghana was very formative for me living in West Africa. I wear my hair
Mm-hmm.
naturally, so either it's in braids or it's in an afro or it's in twists. I don't treat it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't, and I think when I arrived in West Africa, I discovered the beauty of what it meant to be African. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of that I wear in my identity and in my clothes as a reminder. I wear lots of African print and I wear my hair naturally. But what I mean by that is when you grow up in South Africa, your African identity is diluted by the history of our country, is the best way I would describe
Yes.
it. I
Mm-hmm.
never fell in love with what that meant, or I never truly accepted what it meant. In a way,
Mm-hmm.
being African and female and as a professional, particularly in financial services, meant a particular thing. So,
Yes.
it was like, oh, this is the group that we need to prioritize. We need more women, we need more Black people. That is true, but it didn't actually engender a love in me of what it meant to be
Mm-hmm.
African.
Yes.
And when I
Yes.
got to Ghana and I met so many people who looked like me, but they were super accomplished, highly educated, like the number of Harvard MBAs and Cambridge undergrads and Oxford, like all sorts of backgrounds and degrees, but all Black people. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not something I'd seen at home. So
Yes.
much of
Yes.
my Pan-African identity and acceptance came as a result of living in West Africa for 4 years
Mm-hmm.
and really discovering what that Africanness meant for Celiwe, for me as a person.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and what I believe my identity and my role would become and still needs to become for the continent as at large. So living there,
Yes.
it changed my life. It changed me completely. And as I say, it precipitated a marriage that was, it precipitated the end to a marriage that was in crisis. But the end of my trip in Ghana led to a new relationship, and we subsequently got married, etc. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but that's another
I
story.
just want to say, this thing that you've just said about your first experience as your identity in terms of being an African. This happened to me, I think it was in 1997. You can just
Mm,
imagine.
mm,
I was asked by Pumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, who was a minister back then, I can't remember in which portfolio, to represent her at a women's conference in Zimbabwe. So here I arrive, uh, at this conference, experiencing African women for the first time,
yes.
and then realizing that, yo, I can identify with these women.
No,
And then realized that I never realized how much of an impact apartheid had had on me in terms of my own identity as an African.
very much.
And for the first time, I embraced myself as an African. And I never forgot that realization, that dawning on me of how I didn't know who I was. I
Yes.
mean, I was 37 at the time, and I didn't know who I was until that day. So I
Yeah,
can identify fully with what you're saying. Okay, you
for
can
sure.
continue.
No, for sure. I can imagine that moment because it happened for me where it's like I look like these people. It's not a language thing. I don't know how to explain it. And even when you hear experiences, it would have been the same in Zimbabwe. Their children are
Mm-hmm.
living in the UK. Their in-laws are studying in the US. The one is
Mm-hmm.
teaching in China. Like the reality of the world, of the global world to these African people was completely different to my reality. and
Mm-hmm.
and and also just how much they accepted and loved, as chaotic as West Africa can be, and I say that with the greatest of respect, but the sense of
Mm.
ownership of the people, their
Yes,
own people
exactly.
own their own economy. That's the thing I felt. The companies I was modeling and viewing, the first meeting I went to was an oil and gas company, and my boss introduces me to two gentlemen who are sitting across the table from me. They were both dark, like navy blue. And he
Mm-hmm.
says, "This is Kwame, this is Kweku." They introduced themselves to shake hands, and he kicks off the meeting. Now, as a typical investment banker, I kind of turn around to him and I say to him, "Kwame, we should wait for the CEO or CFO to join." And he says to me, "Oh, sorry, I realized I didn't tell you. Kweku's the CEO of this company." And Kwame, like I realized in my head, I was expecting to see
Mm-hmm.
two white guys there. That's how
Yes.
conditioned our
Wow.
mind is
Mm.
to what success looks like, to what corporate life looks like. My
Mm.
son was educated and like his formative years were all but with people, and it's not because there's anything wrong with white people. Please don't get me wrong. It was just
Mm.
about the fact that he was surrounded by excellence that looked like him. His dentist was
Mm.
black. His maths teacher
Mm-hmm.
was black. His everything around him was just like, I can do this. It's possible. It's accessible. And at the time that I was living in Ghana, which was the kind of it was 2010, 2011 for 4 years until 2015. South Africa wasn't there. I think it's getting there. It's getting better, but it wasn't there. It was a definite moment of awakening to me about what it means to be African. It's like that Thabo Mbeki poem. It comes to life. You start to realize that I have roots here. There are parts of
Mm-hmm.
me that identify with all these people. In as much as my
Mm-hmm.
country had taught me to not accept it, to not identify with it, etc. So it was definitely formative.
When you talk about, I don't want to miss this point. When you talk about owning your economy, that is my biggest problem. Why, I mean, there is this deep desire for me to awaken the African giant in ourselves. Because I asked myself, after 30 years of democracy, we still don't own our own economy as Black people, African people in South Africa. And I'm like, if we don't wake up today, it will be another 30 years and we'll still not own our own economy as Africans. And I'm always thinking about, I mean, you've been in financial services, you've seen innovative entrepreneurship change the world in many ways. You've funded a
Mm,
lot of those kinds of projects, in the
mm.
continent and in South Africa. What do you think needs to be done for us to awaken to that realization that if we as this generation, okay, I'm an older generation, I'm looking at you now, we sort of maybe laid a foundation, but we expected the next generation to take this to the next level. What do you think needs to be done? What do you think is holding us back?
Mamnonko, for me, the first is mindset. If you don't believe it's possible, if you haven't seen it done, you can't create it. And my challenge always with my own country has been that we have to show that it's possible. So you can only see it when you see it in other places. And I want to use Kenya as an example. So the financial sector in Kenya, yes, there's many multinational, Standard Bank is there, etc. But I'm talking about local banks, Equity Bank, Kenya Commercial Bank, deeply anchored in the communities that they originate from, very much native Kenyan in their identity and in the products that they serve and in the places that they locate themselves in, even though they've grown throughout East Africa. What is helpful in East Africa that we don't have in South Africa is a common language, one common language. Whilst many South Africans speak isiZulu, it's not like Swahili. Kiswahili is the common language of all people throughout East Africa, my apologies. So that has a connecting thing in it. And for me, the audacity of West Africans, like the audacity of a Nigerian banker is unbelievable. Like the way they carry themselves, the way they dress, the way they talk. They are educated. So they're not talking from a place of arrogance or whatever. Many of them work for Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley. They've seen what the world is. More Black South Africans need to see what is out there and then come back and do it. Like I just think that the way to do it is the way that we have been set up is not necessarily sustainable. So that's the first thing I think needs to change. I also think, Mamnomgu, we have to stop waiting for someone to come and save us, for someone to come and do it for us. It's not going to be government. Government has a role and a very important role, but many of us have a role too. I believe in the role and the power of financial services personally. It's where I've built the bulk of my professional life now and my career. I believe in financial services as a catalyst for growth, economic growth, and the growth of the continent as the provider of new products, services, lines of business, liquidity, all sorts of things. It is the engine that financial services can be. It's the engine of the economy. It's what creates liquidity and financial markets. And so we have a massive role to play, not just in financing, it's creating the conditions for financing to happen. And then I believe in the role very much of creating space for SMEs to grow. And I'm not, maybe I wouldn't say SMMEs, I don't know enough about micro enterprises, but I think there's really a role for small and medium enterprises. As the future employers, as the future catalysts for growth, as the future fintechs, insurtechs, disruptors of industry, and as the future accelerators of what AI is very clearly becoming for this continent. It will happen in small and medium enterprises way quicker than it will in large and listed companies like we are.
Okay. Thank you. So let's just continue and go back to the career. Yes, after Africa, what then happened?
So I was working for Standard Bank and they brought me back home after 4 years to a bigger role in investment banking that was covering East and West Africa. By all means, it was very successful. I was on the track to become eventually at a point the head of investment banking. But I recognize now, I didn't then, I recognize now that I had changed after 4 years of living in West Africa. I was very impatient to see more people like me around the tables I was at. In simple terms, I'd gotten so used to being surrounded by a whole lot of people who looked like me, who were excellent at what they did, that it was not the differentiator. But I came back home in 2015 and I was still the first, the only, whether it was Black person, woman, Black woman. I just was like, this can't be right in 2015. This can't be where we are. And I felt like I wanted to do something to shift that, not just from a transformation perspective, but really starting to think about how we build teams that are diverse and that enable especially Black Africans to grow. And I joined a global exec search firm called Egon Zender. Again, I moved into executive search not really knowing what it was. They approached me. I thought they were trying to headhunt me for a job for someone else, but instead the headhunter was headhunting me for themselves. And I joined Egon Zehnder. Egon Zehnder is the world's largest unlisted leadership advisory firm. They have a very interesting business model where they hire business professionals and executives in their own right to have
Mm-hmm.
conversations about leadership and succession and team effectiveness with their peers. So they don't employ HR people, not that there's anything wrong with HR people. They employ people who come from business to talk to business people about issues
Mm-hmm.
that largely find themselves in the HR world. And I was fascinated by how this could work as an engineer, MBA, business professional. How do I transition into this? So obviously they have training and all of that sort of stuff. Lots of management consultants, lots of engineers, bankers, etc., who have built their careers and then start to work in this space where they advise the C-suite. They advise CEOs and excos and boards on leadership. And I felt like, here's my opportunity. At that time, Old Mutual was a client. They had announced this big managed separation transaction. We were returning the company back home to Africa. And it became both a financial conversation, but a leadership conversation. Like, who's going to lead this company into that future? What is it going to look like? What types of people do we need, both at board and at exco level? And then, the client headhunted me. So Old Mutual asked me to join them permanently. I joined Old Mutual initially as chief of staff, working very closely with the board and with the executive at that time to prepare
Mm-hmm.
for listing back home. Not only just dealing with structure, I think that's probably the easiest part. It was really dealing with people, with market facing roles, with the governance that needed to exist, and then how effectively you take this team into the listed environment in South Africa and prepare it for growth.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for almost 2 years. At that time, the then HR director decided to take early retirement. The role of HR director became available, but we were very clear, myself and our CEO at the time, a gentleman called Peter Moyo, a very big part of what has formed me as a leader and the way that I think, like the formative parts of my executive career were honed under the guidance of Peter. And he was very clear that he didn't want a traditional HR leader. He was looking for someone a bit more commercial, someone who didn't come from that line, who had grown up there. I think it's because at Old Mutual, the practices were pretty well established. We just wanted to move into the future of something different. So I got very much involved in creating the role and enabling its success in that executive team. And on the day before the ad closed, I decided to apply. And the rest
Mm,
is history.
it's history.
I was successful in the role, and led the human capital function for about 5 years. And then about 2-3 years ago, they added group strategy to my leadership as well. So I led the strategy and human capital functions for the group. And now I also have sustainability and public affairs. So it's a big job.
I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen a case where strategy is added to the HR director. I don't think I've seen that in corporate.
Mm.
Why do you think that made sense to include it to HR? Was it about the person in the role, or was it a strategic sort of move?
I think it was more the latter than the former. Possibly a part of it about the person in the role, because I was never going to be a career HR director. I'm not going to be. I think I've built a pretty successful brand in the human capital space in South Africa and in the continent, and I'm really pleased and privileged to have been given that opportunity. But it's not where I see my future. I'm 45 now. I still have quite a bit of an executive career to go. And I think, to our CEO's credit, he recognized, I think, that there was more capacity and capability there. But I think more importantly than Celiwe, it is about the fact that in financial services, you're not a manufacturer of widgets. You don't sell things that people can touch and feel. You sell
Mm-hmm.
the ideas and problem solving abilities of people. And so when your
Yes.
people function and your strategy function, so the strategy function sets the strategic direction, the focus areas, the metrics, and the execution methodology. People deliver it.
Mhm.
So the two can work
Yes.
very closely together to make that happen.
Okay. Okay. It makes sense. So, I mean, I've been listening to you. You are a mining engineer, and you started in the mines, which I think is just, brilliant to actually start there. I can just imagine what kind of foundation that helped in building who you became. And then you decided to go into an MBA. What informed that decision, and how did it change your career, as you've already shared? But just give us the insights.
No, it definitely changed things. So, as I said, the first 5 years or so of my career were very technical. Even when I was studying mining engineering, Mamnongo, I knew I didn't want to run a mine. Many of my classmates did. By the time I got to my third year, I was the only girl left. We started out as five. I was the only one left in my third year, so graduated as the only female and the first Black African female.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't see that as the differentiator. It was really that the industry at that time was not necessarily very welcoming to women. And there are
Okay.
practical reasons why. Firstly, I can't lift as much as they can. I can't run as far. I can't carry as heavy as they can. The conditions
Mm-hmm.
underground can be quite exacting.
Mm-hmm.
And the female body just has its own challenges to overcome that. I think the mining industry has done well to start to change the environment, both underground and on surface, to be more accommodating to
Mm-hmm.
women with practical things
Okay.
like change rooms and toilets, but
Yeah.
also with different roles and responsibilities that make it more enabling for us to be able to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that I credit so much of my success in HR to those first 5 years of working underground. Nothing will galvanize a team than realizing every single morning that you go underground together, that your lives and your joint success depends on each other. Any one of you
Mm-hmm.
could die that day, anything could happen underground that injures or affects the other. And in moments of crisis, when there's no water or the air pressure isn't working or the coolant isn't working or equipment is stuck, the quality of conversations that I had with men, who many of whom were close to my father's age, many of him
Mm-hmm.
didn't complete primary school, but you get to understand that there's a fundamental quality in humanity that makes us human as people. It's not about education, it's not about gender, it's not about race. It is a human condition, which is to want better for the generations that follow us than for ourselves. And for many of those men, they just wanted better for their kids than what they had.
Mm-hmm.
And every ounce of work that they did, every bonus that they earned was about how it was going to set their families up differently than what they had. So this need to advance, it's a human condition. It's AI is
Mm-hmm.
an advancement. The internet was an
Yes.
advancement. Electricity was an advancement. It's a human condition thing. We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
set the status quo as it is. And it's a lesson
Yes.
that I learned sitting in the depths of the earth with a group of men in my section that I had accountability to work with. They obviously recognized that I was educated differently, I had different skills, etc., and they wanted to tap into that. I needed to help them and tap into their knowledge. They'd been working underground for 20, 30 years, some of them. I was never going to catch up to that. So as hard as it was very hard, very remote, very hot, very physically exacting, many negatives I could focus on. But the positives of it are the lessons I carry with me today from a leadership perspective were learned underground with this team of 9 guys.
Mm-hmm.
9 million. And so I recognized, though, that there was a limited capacity to what I would do as a leader in the mining industry of that time. I wanted more, I wanted different. I didn't know what it looked like, and I thought the MBA could unlock that for me. And in the process of applying for my MBA, I then attended this Women in Mining breakfast where I had this conversation with an executive at Standard Bank. And my interest was really piqued around what investment banking was about, what a person like me could do in investment banking. And what happened for me in the MBA was it helped me take my technical knowledge as an engineer and merge it with a level of financial knowledge. It's nothing like a financial or a BCom degree by any stretch of the imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But it does give a very technically trained person an opportunity to translate their knowledge and understand the financial impacts of that. That's what the
Yes.
MBA for me. It's not a specialist degree, but at least it helped to provide a bridge. And it helped me start, at least in the bank, understanding what people were talking about when they talked about interest and discounted cash flows and debentures and security and all of those sorts of things, which an engineering degree just didn't equip me with. Um,
Yes.
and then I was back on the drawing board, needing to learn from scratch what it meant to build a good financial model, what credit is about, and writing good credit papers and legals and negotiating legal agreements with counterparties. I was very clear.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to be a banker. With the greatest of respect, I respect people who work in markets. I just wasn't that person. Numerically, I could do it, but I didn't like the syntheticness of it. I still craved to be able to touch things. And so I built
Mm-hmm.
most of my career in investment banking in project finance, which is about financing physical assets, mines, ports,
Okay.
railways, in power stations, and the like. And there's nothing as gratifying as having worked on something for a few years and seeing it come to life, like stand up and the
Yes.
structure. And particularly in mining, there's other associated infrastructure that you get to get involved in, schools and hospitals and transporting routes that get this ore to the market that it needs to get to. So it was a very, very gratifying part of my career, and got to see the role, certainly of the mining industry, but even more so the energy and infrastructure industry in growing the prosperity of the continent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what started exposing me to what was happening to other countries outside of Southern Africa at that
Yes.
time.
Okay. All right. People worry about the future. How am I going to find what I want to do? What is my purpose? There's a lot of misunderstanding around what purpose is. And we get stuck in worrying about, I don't know my purpose. I don't know my purpose. I don't know what my future looks like. And it looks like you just float with life, and life led you in different directions. What would you say to all those people who have those worries?
For me, Mamnonku, purpose is where you are. The future is so uncertain. There's
Mm-hmm.
this great quote that I love. It's actually the strapline on my WhatsApp that says, "People crave certainty, but as a leader, certainty is the one thing you can't give to people. The next best thing is clarity." And you can only
Mm-hmm.
get clarity up to so far. I don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So for me, my purpose is where I am today. It's the horizon with which I can see and what I can influence. When I connect the dots backwards in my own career, the thing I recognize is the comfort to deal with uncertainty and the comfort to
Mm-hmm.
not know. I think it's the thing that has made me me. It's contributed to my success a great deal, because I haven't wanted to be able to predict what it has to look like. Like I didn't know anything about investment banking. I didn't know anything about
Yes.
executive search. I didn't know anything about insurance. It's made me
Mm-hmm.
comfortable to recruit the right types of people who know more than I do, and I'm pretty comfortable with that. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be the smartest person in the room. I recognize that my role is to unleash that in other people. And if I do, it just makes me so much better at what I do. And I'm very
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with not knowing. So if anyone was going to ask me, like, what role are you going to do next? I honestly don't know. I don't know.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I really care. I think God has showed me enough to know that it'll be fine wherever it lands, wherever that next is,
Mm-hmm.
it will be fine. I have too many proof points to suggest anything would be different. And so I'm just
Yes.
comfortable in that. And I think people try to think too far into the future. There are only so many Elon Musks and Microsofts and Satya Nadellas and all these big personalities. Of course, they are there, but there's only so few of them. I think that for the
Mm.
rest of us, like, our purpose is just where we are. It's to make it better than
Mm-hmm.
what we found it, and then the next opportunity will come. That's certainly been
Yes.
mine.
Okay. I mean, when you look at the diversity of your experience, I mean, it's just amazing how you just moved from one sector into another, into another. How do you think that has shaped who you are and you've become as a leader?
Yeah,
Because
it's
I mean,
shaped.
we are always told to be focused. You must focus, and yeah.
I think it's shaped a lot. It's been a big part, along with uncertainty and not being predictable about what was going to happen. It shaped a lot of the diversity in my own thinking. People see diversity from a race or a gender or a qualification perspective. I have a lot of diversity of thought and diversity of experience, because I've just
Mm.
had to deal with different industries, different roles, different functions, different countries, different industries. So it's I think it's made the quality of my thinking, and it's framed the quality of my messaging and leadership differently, because I've had to
Mm-hmm.
become comfortable with difference. My personal view, Mamnongo, is that the world has become increasingly intolerant because we are attracted to the same. We want to drive for the
Mm.
same. So the more we
Yes.
surround ourselves with people who look like us, sound like us, believe what we believe, go to the same church that we do, eat what we eat, whatever the case may be, it makes us
Mm-hmm.
more intolerant, and so we want to fight to keep the same. And believe me,
Mm-hmm.
I don't like people in my team disagreeing with me, having different ideas about how we could do things, but being open to it is a start. I just think
Mm-hmm.
the willingness to be open to the fact that somebody's difference can be additive and not decrease me would help
Yes.
in this world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk around women leaders, how we don't support other women, how we become a divisive force. We've seen a lot of these women fall from very high positions because of, you know, just a noise that starts around them, and so on. We never know what the truth is. I always worry about how we talk about supporting women and including them in higher positions and so on. But once they get there, then we don't give them the necessary support. So, what do you say about these noises around women? How have you escaped the noises? How have you led as a woman, and how have you supported other women in your role as a leader?
Yeah. Sure, it's a great question because I know for a fact that there are many people and women who are walking around out there who credit me with helping them in their success, but equally there are those who would feel like I was very much a part of their demise. It's the unfortunate part of executive leadership and the things that people will never see or appreciate, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
In my job, I get to see the absolute best of people. It's so rewarding. But to be honest, I also get to see the absolute worst of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the people who have thrived under my leadership are people who believe in excellence in all its forms. And excellence doesn't mean you have to be the best. You can only be excellent when you know what you don't know and are willing to work at that and pull the levers that you can to become better. Once
Mm-hmm.
you become comfortable and you think you know it all, it's the sure start of demise from excellence, in my view. So the humility to acknowledge and to know that you just don't know it all, you'll never be on top of it, and you're going to have to rely on others to help you and lead you, for me, drives that. And so I feel the people who have succeeded, and particularly women and Black women who have succeeded under me, are those who have sought counsel. It's those who have done the inner work of knowing themselves, been true to themselves, and then gone
Mm-hmm.
out and sought to do better. I continue to do that myself. I'm not perfect by any stretch of
Mm-hmm.
the imagination. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. I've disappointed people. But it has never come from a place of malicious intent. Never, never, ever. Because in
Mm-hmm.
every conversation, I will say to someone, I believe you can do this better. You have to believe you can do it better. You have to believe you can do it differently, and you have to want to. If the dissonance happens in you believing that you're already doing it better, that's the start of
Mm-hmm.
the end, between us.
Yes.
No, Mamnungo, I've also realized that sometimes letting people go is the best thing. Best thing for them, best thing for you. I've seen people I've let go on and do much better things. Good for them. It
Mm-hmm.
makes me happy to see them
Yes.
thrive in another environment when they weren't thriving with me, in my team, in my
Mm-hmm.
company, in my leadership, and they go and find it
Yes.
elsewhere. Letting them go then was the best thing for them. The worst thing that can happen to a person, to me as a leader, to a company, is to hold on to someone who's not doing their best work, who's not happy with me as a leader, with the direction of the company. They should go. It's the best thing for them.
Mm-hmm.
They should go.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, you're talking about people finding who they are and making the effort to find who they are. Uh, but practically, it's actually very difficult to find your authentic self in corporate South Africa
Mm.
because, especially as a woman, as a Black person, you walk into a corporate culture. There's um, there's already a view about who you are, and you are expected to fit into this stereotype of woman or Black person or whatever. So these groups have much more to deal with to find their authentic self than the average white person, even a white woman, for instance, in corporate South Africa. So, how do we find our authentic self with all the challenges that Black people are facing? And how did you manage to progress and thrive in these environments as a Black woman?
Um, I wouldn't. Firstly, the more senior I've become, the harder and not easier it has become. Because whilst your voice is elevated and your impact is increased, to maintain that takes more than I think people always realize. I have had the great privilege of good mentors, but even better sponsors. People who
Mm-hmm.
spoke for me in rooms that I would never have entered, people who believed and gave me radical chances to do things that, when looking on paper, just shouldn't be possible. And a part of this level of success, I think, needs that, to be honest. It needs it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, you can't make it on your own. You need that. The reality is, though, many of those sponsors were men. Many were white men. A few were black men, and not really always women. It's also, in the formative parts of my career, there just weren't that many women. There are some, but the bulk, if I have to think about the ones that I credit, many of them are actually white men. So I think that I always say to people, you can't ask someone to sponsor you. You can ask someone to mentor you. You can't ask someone to sponsor you. But there's a lot about positioning yourself for sponsorship that I think we don't do enough of. And it's a skill that you have to learn, and it's hard work. A lot of it starts from within. So it's growing a level of confidence. There are many things I've done that I'm sure have angered and upset my boss and bosses before. There are things that I've done where people have said she's so brave, and some people have said she is stupid, that I would have never done that,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of it for me has come from a place of, to thine own self be true. And so knowing who I am, knowing like success won't come at all costs for me. There's a point at which it's not worth it. There's a cost for my family and for myself that is just not worth it, that I wouldn't advance. But I also have values and faith and other constructs that make me a certain way. So it has taught me not to necessarily be afraid to speak truth to power in a respectful way, in a constructive way. I always say in my role, I'm not always paid to be popular, unfortunately. And so I've had to learn how to call things out and hold the mirror to people at a very senior level about how either they show up, how the impact they have on people, what could be done differently and what could be done better. And that confidence has taken time to grow. Do
Mm-hmm.
I have imposter syndrome at times? Of course I do. There are times when I'm like, how the hell did I make it here? How are these people listening to me? Those things continue to happen, but I've done the inner work and I continue to do the inner work. When I feel like, oh, I'm starting to see old habits creep back, I'm starting to lose my confidence, I'm starting to feel tested in my faith, I just go back and do the work with a lot of external support. I have a great coach, I have a good therapist, and I'm religious as well, which helps.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So it starts with you. I mean, no one is going to do that for you because I mean, unfortunately, as human beings, we always are looking for affirmation, validation from others. Someone must affirm me to be a strong, powerful leader. If I don't see that affirmation, then I start to doubt myself and so on, which actually says that you don't know who you are if you're waiting for other people to validate you, and so on. So now let's move to this big question of balance. You talk about, I'm married. You talk about family. It looks like the second time around you made the right decision, having learned from the previous one, because
Mhm.
unfortunately we don't learn from our mistakes, so we keep repeating them and repeating them and repeating them. And what would you say made a difference this time in terms of the choice, in terms of making it work? Because I mean, I divorced when I was 34 years old with three children. right? It's not something that I wish for other women, because being a single woman, a single mother, has been the hardest thing that I don't
Mhm.
wish upon anybody. But just talk to us about, those decisions, what you learned, and so on,
Yeah.
and how have you found balance this time around, if there is anything called balance.
I don't think there is. That is an unattainable goal. Well, and if you choose to have a big professional career, Mamnuk, when I speak to women, and particularly single women, but in any case, all women and professional women, I always say to them that the life partner you choose is one of the biggest career decisions you'll make. And what I mean by that is if you decide you want to stay at home and raise your children, which is a noble profession in and of itself, the hardest job in the world, um, to be a stay at home parent, that is a career choice. Whether you decided to go to
Mhm.
university and then get married and have your kids, whatever, that's a career choice. You've got
Yes.
to pick the life partner who's going to enable that. You can't resent the guy you married and you were at university and both of you were gunning for these big careers. And then suddenly you come back and you say, actually, I want to stay at home. And you get
Mhm.
surprised. He's like, how, baby? I thought we were going to do this together. That's a
Mhm.
different contract that you're signing. So I think, again, it goes back to knowing yourself and what you want and seeking out the person who's going to bring that to life with you and not
Mhm.
resent you for it. And it's the same with making the decision or the choice to follow a big corporate career. That's a career decision. Find the
Mhm.
person who's going to support you in that. I think that was the biggest lesson for me is you need to accept that people don't change. Men, women, we don't change. So I think sometimes women think, oh, I like this guy. He's got all these great attributes. There's this and that. We see the signs, but we believe somehow they're going to change. Even worse still,
Mhm.
we think children will change it or improve it. And they don't. They
Yes.
elevate the size of the chasm between you. I'm not saying that it's not possible to fix issues in marriage. Of course it is, but both parties
Mhm.
have to be willing to fix them. So for me, I think second time around, I had a very deep consciousness about what I wanted to become as a person, as a wife, as a mother, and as a professional. And I was very conscious about the type of person I wanted to be. I think the first time around, Mamnunku, there was a lot of synthetic pressure that I didn't realize I was succumbing to. Firstly,
Mhm.
my identical twin sister met her husband on the first day of university. In orientation week at the School of Engineering, she bumps into this guy. I'm sure the lights and the music went off. My sister, we're twins, so she's 45, has been married for 20 years. So she got
Wow.
married at 25. And
Mhm.
she left home immediately after she graduated with a promise ring from her husband, who's Namibian. So she doesn't even live in South Africa, and left to go and be with him. And they got married 2 years later, have two beautiful daughters. They've also lived all over the continent because guess what? He's a mining engineer. So
Oh.
they've had their own experience. So I think that Setu's journey actually placed a level of pressure on me that I didn't realize because I had extended family asking, "Kanti ushada nini nawe?"
Oh, yes.
And I don't think I realized how much I internalized that. My
Mhm.
best friend got married very early, in fact, in her last year of university because she fell pregnant in that year and is still together with her husband, thank God. And again, it's that synthetic pressure of like, I have this really close girlfriend. She's now gotten married. My twin sisters got married. Like people are starting to get into that. I think I was reacting a lot to that pressure. I would have done my due diligence very differently, but at that time felt like, okay, this is good enough in a way. Like I think I can make
Yes.
this work, and that's not a basis from which to decide to get married.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think I'd learned those lessons, and because I already had Ndlela, my first son, I was also very conscious that I come as a package deal. So anyone who chooses me has to choose him, and
Yes.
I have been blessed. As we speak today, it's the last day of school. My eldest son is in boarding school in KZN. My husband is there fetching him. I'm here to watch our younger two who have a school concert today.
Mhm.
Many people to this day are actually shocked when they hear that Andre is not Ndlela's blood father. People are convinced they look the same. They don't. Well, people think they look the same. Ndlela looks a lot like his father, his biological father. They have a good relationship, but I'm blessed that Ndlela has an equally good relationship with Andre. He always
Mhm.
says, "Mom, I'm like Jesus. I have two dads," and
Oh,
that's
yes.
special. That he sees that and he sees that it's possible.
Mhm.
I don't think it's been easy for him. I don't think it's easy having to split your school holidays and your weekends, etc. But I also, when we talk to him, we also say to him on the opposite side, if you see how this boy adjusted to boarding school at the age of 13, literally this whole year, we never got a phone call that was like, please come and fetch me. I can't do this. He just gets on with things. He adjusts,
Mhm.
makes friends easily, he assimilates. And I believe that that's going to be a gift for him that's going to carry him through life. It's something that has come from adversity that he's just turned into a positive. We have two
Mhm.
more children. We struggled very much after Ndlela to have another baby. And after lots of medical intervention, at 38, I said, that's it. I'm not doing this anymore. We have one child, and we'll raise him and just accept that this is what God has given us. And surprise and completely naturally fell pregnant at 40. And I had two more children at 41 and 43. So I have a 2-year-old and I'm 45. So it's a busy household.
Wow. Wow.
The gift of
Wow.
COVID.
Wow.
It was so
The-
like I just think so many things that appear as adversities in life can yield the most beautiful outcomes. They can yield the most um like the biggest rainbows in the midst of what looks like a storm in life, if you're
Mm.
willing to see it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
And so honestly, I just count myself as blessed. Do I have
Mhm.
balance? No, but I'm blessed. I'm blessed to have a
Yes.
partner who in his own right has a big career. He's still an investment banker today, travels a great deal, but is very anchored in his role as father and as husband, and sees himself as an equal partner to me. So when I'm traveling, he will plan his life around what has to happen at home in the same way that when he's traveling, I have to plan my life around what's happening at
Mhm.
home. And that partnership is a real blessing. Um,
So how did you achieve that? Because I mean, when I speak to especially young women around finding this balance, around having open conversations at home in terms of how you're going to do this. I'm ambitious. I want my own career. You're ambitious, and so on. And they always say, "Mama, they don't want to listen. They don't even want. I can't even broach the subject, and so on." How did this happen? Did you have a conversation? Was he already open to, being an equal participant in raising children, household chores, and things like that? How did you achieve this?
Yeah, I think he was open. So he himself had come out of a failed marriage, and I think there's nothing quite like failure to catalyze you for what success looks like. So
Mhm.
as hard as a divorce is, and both of us had gone through one, we were both determined to do it right the second time. And I think for me, I was very clear under what condition I would consider remarrying. And as I said, like the things like a package deal, like I value work. I actually enjoy it. On some level, work is sanity for me.
Mhm.
I go on maternity leave, and the first 3 months it's great. By month 4, I'm like, this is cool. I've enjoyed it, but I've got to get back to work. And I've got to balance, my mothering responsibilities with work, with as much judgment as that comes with. I'm sure there'll be people who listen to this and they're like, "Yo, did she really say that?" But for me, it matters. I'm not built for full time motherhood. It wouldn't bring me joy. I think
Mhm.
I'm a better mother and a better partner and a better friend because I have to balance work and personal life. Either one
Yes.
of the two is it just wouldn't have been enough for me as a person. And again, it's taken a lot of deep work for me to accept that about myself. And
Mhm.
so I think I was very clear about that I would always want to work. I was an investment banker at the time, so is he. So he knew the demands of being an iBanker. I knew it. So I think, went in with our eyes wide open. Mam Nonku, that's not to say there weren't tough discussions, particularly when these last two came. It's
Mm-hmm.
not to say that there aren't times when you have to negotiate around how things happen. But
Mm-hmm.
as long as if the conditions for that level of discussion and negotiation are there, then I think, you're A for away. That's good. If you're not able to have those conversations and challenge, how I feel I'm carrying this part of the load and I'm not managing this and I need your help more. I need you to take more accountability for this. You have to have those conversations. There are times when I'm like, I'm not the only one on these school WhatsApp groups. You're there too. So you can't
Mm-hmm.
wait for me to translate like what's happening for the school concert or who has to. We kind of have to sit and plan it together. As
Mm-hmm.
our eldest has gotten older, we've also involved him a lot in that. We have a quasi AGM at the start of the year, talk about our financial goals for the year, where are we planning to go on holiday? What is it that we want to save for? What are the big things, expenditure wise that we want to do in that year? And he sets his own goals, academic goals, sporting goals, whatever the case may be. And we use that AGM to kind of sit back and say, what have we done? Like, let's go back at the start of the year. This is what we said we would do. And then
Mm-hmm.
also teaching him that we set goals, we strive for things, some we achieve, some we don't.
Yes.
But also that I worry sometimes that our kids don't have the obvious hardships that we grew up under. So I could tell my parents didn't
Yes.
have money. I knew I
Mm-hmm.
had to study hard to get a bursary to be able to go to university. They wouldn't have been able to afford to take me to university.
Mm-hmm.
There were realities of where we lived, etc., etc., that were obvious. For my kids,
Mm-hmm.
it's not as obvious. Not because I'm
Yes.
wealthy. It's just because they don't live in a township. They see plastic money and they think they can't make sense of the fact that it's not limitless. So how do you teach
Mm-hmm.
them those values that, a rand is valuable, it takes work. And we talk a lot about that. Like, Ndlela, there are things you will get because we may have the means. There are things you won't get because to create those means we have to work hard in other things. And what's the cost of that working hard versus other things? And how do we make those trade-offs together all the time? It was very important for me, especially for him as a boy child. Our last one is also a boy, and Zaogusha, and then we've got a girl in the middle, Uliana Izulu. They, it's important. I felt it important for them to see what a healthy relationship dynamic looks like. Not a perfect one. My marriage is not perfect, but it's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
We fight, we
Okay.
disagree, we make up. We have to
Mm.
make trade-offs. We have to hold equal responsibility for things, not just financially, but for domestic responsibilities, for familial responsibilities, for all sorts of things that are just a load on parents and on professional parents, because it can be a lot. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important for them to see that negotiated settlement. And we try to be intentional about us alone. We try to go away without them at least twice a year. On some years it's once a year, some years it's 3 times a year, hopefully, but at least twice a year to go away, just us, to try
Mm-hmm.
and reinvest in the tank. And then very intentional about our time away with our kids because we both have very busy and demanding jobs and need to keep on refilling into them as well. It's not perfect. I really don't want to paint a perfect picture. It isn't. But I'm super grateful for the second chance I was given and committed to do the work to continue to make it so.
So, what do you say now to these women who are obviously making choices? Some are making choices of not getting married. Others are, even if I get married, I will have no children because I'm choosing my career. Others are deciding to have children alone and even using what do you call this, artificial
Yeah.
things to have children alone, going to those extents. I
Mm,
mean, women are making decisions and choices for themselves because they can.
mm,
Maybe our grandmothers didn't have the opportunity to have those choices, but younger
mm.
women have the choices. I just worry about the future where, more and more and more women are making those choices because they just don't see marriage work. They don't have many examples of marriage working.
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with the examples of marriage working. That's certainly our commitment to our children and people in our ecosystem to at least have an example of a healthy Black marriage. Despite my surname,
Mhm.
my husband is Black, from
Okay.
Cape Town. So I think that it's important for us to set that example and to create a self-fulfilling prophecy for others, and to surround ourselves with people who are doing the same, so that you, in the midst of some of your challenges, know that you're going to overcome it. And the more you realize the things that people have to survive in their marriages, the death of a child, the loss of parents, the financial shocks, all sorts of things, and those who come through those, you realize it's the size of the commitment that you've established. I think that's the first thing. It's just examples, and I'm fortunate to be surrounded by them, both from my parents and then friends. And as I said, my sister just celebrated 20 years of marriage, which is an incredible commitment. And it's not because any of those marriages were perfect. I think it's just striving to make it work. That's the first thing. I do think we have to accept that families and relationships are changing. As you said, I think our grandparents didn't have that choice. Women have those choices, and they should have those choices, I believe, provided that it's a choice that they're making from an informed place. Understanding, obviously, with everything, just like marriage or single parenthood or dual parenthood, everything has got its sacrifice points. So having that level of understanding will help. And also, we can only do the best. That's why I say I have friends who've decided to have children by themselves. I have friends who are divorced. I have friends who've been married throughout. I have friends who are not married. We need to get comfortable with existing with all of those dualities and what they mean. And accepting that mine is my journey and I've got to see it through. I worry about families, Mamnonko, that I have to say, and maybe this is from a deeply Christian place. And so for those who are not, they'll have to forgive me, but I do worry, because I think that families are the sanctity from which the world has grown. And populations have grown, but also values have evolved and roles have evolved, etc. It has started from that family unit. And preserving it matters to me. Maybe to other people not. Preserving it really matters to me, because I'd like, hopefully, my children to do the same. And I believe that you just make the circle bigger each time. The companionship and having a place to talk about difficult things, about what's happening at work, about child rearing. Yes, you can have that with a friend, but it's very different with a spouse. Having someone to pray with and for you, and for your family, and to share that load and that responsibility helps. Marriage is a massive mirror, like parenthood. There isn't a bigger mirror that will be held to you as the one that your spouse or your child will hold to you. And so also the willingness to have that mirror held to you, to listen and to hear. And it's not because I do it perfectly. Geez, there are things about my kids. I hear my mother's voice, the things that I thought I will never do this. I will never say this to my kids, that I see myself doing when I'm like, yeah, mama, sorry. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So,
We've run out of time. As I close, I just want your last words to those young people, men and women who look up to you. What would you say to them as they plan their future?
I would say to them, just know that you're enough. Everything that is in you gives you the ability to become whatever it is that you're going to become. And so you're enough for that. The rest is ice cream. The rest is it starts from within. I just believe people shouldn't be afraid to do the deep inner work and to be true to themselves. And then that's enough.
Okay, not good enough. Thank you so much, Celiwe. I knew this interview would be exciting, but I mean, the different insights that you've shared here, I know my listeners are really going to learn a lot from this interview. I appreciate sacrificing the time.